On a plateau in Egypt a few kilometers from the city of Cairo, Gizeh is a city on the left bank of the Nile, at its delta in the north. Gizeh is world-renowned for its immense necropolis and its very famous and great pyramids, those of Cheops, Khephren, and Mycerinus. The Great Pyramid of Cheops, with its sides aligned to the four cardinal points, measures over 230 meters, at its base for a perimeter of 922 meters. It weighs about 5 million metric tons, each brick of polished limestone weighing an average of 2.5 metric tons. 137 meters tall, it dominates the Gizeh Plateau. The Pyramid of Cheops, built under the ancient empire during the 4th dynasty around 2650 BC, is the Great Pyramid, the tallest pyramid in Egypt, and until the beginning of the 20th century, it was also the largest, the highest, and the most massive monument ever constructed. For 2,000 years, this pyramid has been one of the 7 wonders of the world. The complex is also composed of a funeral temple, secondary pyramids, annexes, and a huge cemetery for what would be contemporary civil servants to the pharaoh with, as a guardian, the majestic Sphinx. These are all illustrious witnesses to the civilization of the Lower Egypt of antiquities. It was at the base of these pyramids, today an amazing tourist attraction, that in July of 1798, the future French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, during his Egyptian campaign, would declare before a decisive battle the famous phrase, "Soldiers, from the top of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you." The Gizeh Sphinx is the statue that stands before the Great Pyramids of the plateau. 73 meters long, 21 meters high, and 14 meters wide, the Sphinx is a monumental sculpture carved into a natural headland of solid rock. It is a therianthropic statue because it shows the intertwining to mystical ends of man and animal. Its head faces the east. The Sphinx's body is that of a reclining or couchant lion, and its head that of a ruler wearing the nemes or headcloth, emblematic of the pharaohs, decorated with a uraeus, the cobra, on the forehead. We can still make out the spot where it had been. For a long time, it has been identified with the pharaoh Khafra, the son of Cheops, and the face that of Cheops himself. Several clues support this, such as the headdress, the breadth of his chin, the form of his ears, or his ceremonial beard. Some also think that it could have been a statue of the jackal dog Anubis, later recycled by another son of Cheops in honor of the father. We think that the Sphinx was meant to guard the site, or perhaps more specifically to the Sun Temple built next to the Pyramid of Cheops. If the site stuns, it is still relatively recently that the scholars of the 19th century considered themselves incapable of reproducing the technical achievements of such works of art. Theories began to appear as they tried to get to the bottom of the mysteries. But the pyramid is above all a tomb and represents one of the purest and most abstract works of art ever conceived. According to Herodotus, the pharaoh Cheops was cruel and unjust to his people. This reputation undoubtedly comes from it being difficult to imagine that an edifice such as the Great Pyramid could be built by anything other than the sweat and suffering of slaves. However, recent discoveries and excavations have revealed traces of a city built by artisans and workers of the plateau. It seems that these workers were well fed and cared for. The cliché of slaves ruled by the whip is knocked down by the discoveries made on site and in the tombs. Thus, it has been hypothesized that the project was a political and spiritual action intending to unite the two lands, meaning the whole of Lower and Upper Egypt. Manpower from all of the villages of Egypt, most likely in waves, joined in on the construction with the artisans and skilled workers. The villages contributed to these great religious projects by sending food supplies to these work sites of the pharaohs. The Pyramid of Cheops is part of a larger funeral complex making up the funereal temple, an ensemble composed of these pyramids, the Queen's Pyramids, 3 other smaller ones, and many mastabas grouped into 3 cemeteries. Little is known of Cheops' reign. Only one ivory statuette in his honor, about 10 centimeters high, has remained. He was the son of King Sneferu and Queen Hetepheres I, and is considered by many to have been one of the greatest pharaohs of ancient Egypt. He owes his reputation to his architectural exploits, among others being the Great Pyramid that took 20 years and 20,000 workers to build. Today, it is considered to be perfection in construction and architecture. Though many Arabic writers have written of the discovery of the pharaoh's body and his burial treasure, the contradictions in their stories place doubt on the truth of these different accounts, many of which were written centuries later. This uncertainty, added to the inviolability of the Great Pyramid's reputation, motivates many archaeologists and historians to continue looking for the funeral chamber that they imagine to be hidden within the monument. This research has been accentuated these last 20 years by the new technologies used for measurement and detection. For over 4,500 years, the greatest monument in Egypt has constantly been studied and examined. This masterpiece is the concentration and culmination of all the architectural techniques put in place since the creation of monumental architecture, and these achievements created an exceptional pyramid. It is easier to describe the outside of the pyramid than the massive inside, whose conception is uncertain. The stones of the Great Pyramid are of varying dimensions, depending on the height at which they were placed. It would seem obvious that as one gets closer to the pyramid summit, the height of each brick would reduce. However, this rule is not applicable here. The bricks decrease in height up to a certain level above the floor. Then from there, they increase in size, then decrease again, then increase again. There are 18 groups of such stones, with various sizes of bricks. This particularity is explained by the origin and nature of the material's use, a limestone quarry whose underground is composed of strata of varying thickness. Pyramid's volume was not only the construction of man, however. The Egyptians chose a pre-existing rocky mound on which they would build the body of their brickwork. This particularity creates yet another problem to understand the extreme precision with which they leveled the base on its 4 sides. The entrance to the pyramid is 15.63 meters high and has above it a system of evacuation with arcs and monolithic beams. Today, we have access to the infrastructures by a hole that was made by Caliph al-Mamun in 820. The hole was made a few meters below the true entrance that leads to a mounting hallway, just behind the granite blocks that still remain at the base of this corridor. The smooth covering of the pyramid was already in place by this time and hid the presence of the original closing. This new entrance was closed by rolling a stone. The siding, originally composed of fine limestone, has almost entirely disappeared. There are only a few blocks remaining, resting on the stones at the base, unlike that of the Pyramid of Khephren, which has been much better preserved. At that time, the pyramids must have shone majestically and brilliantly in the sunlight. The Pyramid of Cheops is part of a larger complex made up of the pyramids of his son Khephren and his grandson Mykerinos. Mykerinos is the Greek name of the ruler Menkaure under the 4th dynasty of the ancient Egyptian Empire. He reigned from approximately 2490 to 2473 BC and succeeded Khephren. As did his father and grandfather, Mykerinos was dedicated to the idea of constructing a pyramid at Gizeh. His is the smallest of the 3 Great Pyramids of the plateau. This pyramid, farthest south, is only 1/10 of the side of the Pyramid of Cheops. It was 66 meters tall and its side 108. The rule of Mykerinos, rich in monumental constructions, ends the chapter of the Great Pyramids in Egyptian art. The funeral complex is also made up of 3 pyramids, those of the queen. Cheops also had a sepulchre created for his mother Hetepheres I after her original tomb had been pillaged. The remains of the funeral temple built at the base of the pyramid possess certain blocks weighing as much as 200 metric tons. All around are many mastabas regrouped into 3 cemeteries. One is to the east behind the Queen's pyramids. The other is south of the Great Pyramid. And the last is to the west of the King's Pyramid in the desert. It was under this sumptuous rule of architecture and royalty that Necropolis began to develop significantly around the royal funeral complex. The pyramid complex of Khephren, the son of Cheops, is the best preserved of the 3, not only in terms of the pyramid, but for the high temple, its mounting gateway, and its lower temple. It is this last, with the Temple of the Sphinx, that provided us with many fragments of statues that we now have in our museums honoring Khephren. The base of the pyramid is a square of 215 meters per side, and it rose to 144 meters when it was constructed. It was coated with limestone siding, which only remains at its summit. Until the 19th century, the history of the exploration of the Pyramid of Khephren was often confused with that of Cheops. To have the first description of the pyramids, we turn all the way back to the Greek historian Herodotus. At the death of Cheops, the royal reign came to his son Khephren. The son followed in his father's footsteps and constructed a pyramid himself that, in all honesty, did not reach the dimensions of that of Cheops. The base of the edifices is made of Ethiopian stones, with differently colored veins running through them. As large as is the first pyramid, this one is 40 meters shorter. On the site of Gizeh, the different sections of the Memphis Necropolis, the ancient capital of the empire in southern Cairo, are today named after the villages that follow from the base of the plateau. The Saqqara cemetery is the oldest part. This is where the very first stone construction appeared around 2765 BC, the pyramid of the pharaoh Djoser. It was constructed long before that of Cheops. The Pyramid of Djoser marked a major evolution in monumental architecture. Indeed, for the first time, and after many modifications, the pharaoh's tomb took the form of a pyramid. This innovation marks the birth of a new type of sepulchre. The pyramid also underwent successive changes before achieving its final form. It is the result of many hesitations, transformations, and innovations, both technical and intellectual. It was the architect Imhotep who conceived this masterpiece of the ancient Egyptian empire. The funeral complex of Djoser is the largest ever constructed in Egypt. It is made up of, among other things, a step pyramid and many cult edifices, a palatial temple, a serdab and chapels, pavilions, storerooms, and an enormous wall surrounding the ensemble of constructions that spreads out over 15 hectares. The trenched wall with sharp angles was originally 10.5 meters tall, with no less than 211 strongholds appearing regularly along its perimeter. The wall has just one entrance at its southeast angle, but 14 false doors. The main entrance, a narrow passage just 1 meter wide, leads to a long corridor. Its side walls are decorated with 20 false colonnades imitating bundles of plant stems, 6.6 meters high. They are not real supporting columns, though. The large courtyard is lined on the south with a facade on which is a frieze of female cobras, the symbol of the monarchy and the representation of the power, both protective and destructive, of the pharaoh. The straight passageway lined with 2 freestanding columns leads to a hypostyle hall, which then leads to the large courtyard running north-south. While the royal chambers have been completely pillaged since antiquity, the archaeological findings from excavations of the funeral complex are absolutely exceptional. Thousands of vases and bowls can be found in these deep galleries, waiting to be dug up. 2 alabaster sarcophaguses, one which contains the skeleton of a child, are still in the royal family's gallery. The royal necropolis under the ancient empire, the site developed around the pyramids. The 2 houses built at the base of the pyramid represent the sanctuaries of Upper and Lower Egypt. Their decorative elements distinguish one from the other. The southern house possesses proto-Doric capitals, now 3 meters but once 12 meters high. It has a Saqqara frieze at its top, showing bundled sticks knotted together that were used in the construction of houses. It hosts the oldest tourist graffiti known to man. An Egyptian from the 18th dynasty wrote this while passing through. The scribe Amos, son of Ta, came to see the temple of Djoser. On seeing it, he discovered the sky within himself, Ra rising in him. The northern house has a primitive Doric-style facade. The capitol's top columns decorated with papyrus flowers. The stone wall of serdab, placed before the pyramid, has 2 holes on its northern side. It protects a copy of a painted human-sized statue of the deceased pharaoh. It is from here he can see and receive his gifts while staring at the stars. The entrance hall and its colonnade lead to the great south court of the Djoser temple. 2 edifices in the form of a B, 11 meters long in the center of the courtyard. They were surely built for the rites of Hepset, the pharaoh's festival. We also find vestiges of an altar behind a little cave, 160 by 90 centimeters, that was found empty. At the sides of this courtyard, the base of one of the statues of the king, today at the Museum of Cairo, was discovered. It was engraved with the name of Imhotep, the site's architect, the chancellor of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, the palace administrator, the noble inheritor, the great priest of Heliopolis, builder, sculptor, and maker of vases. The earthquake of October 12, 1992 seriously affected the pyramid's infrastructures and the site. With the arc of the Great Funeral Well and its ceiling of underground galleries at risk of collapse, a preservation mission was launched by the Supreme Council of Egyptian Antiquities to lead the restoration work. A 28-meter deep well, starting at the base of the Wall of Cobras, leads to the southern tomb of Djoser, a sepulchre whose underground is a copy of the step pyramid's infrastructures. Jue, today in open air, goes down to a granite cave leading to chambers and 3 storerooms. The Pyramid of Unas, the last king of the 5th dynasty in 2350 BC, was just 43 meters high and 57 meters long on its side. Today, it is heavily damaged. The excavations undertaken at the beginning of the 20th century allowed us to identify a series of writings engraved into the walls of the burial chamber, the pyramid texts. These are the first religious writings of Egypt. Almost nothing is left of the funeral temple of Unas, but along the path from the pyramid that leads to the Temple of the Valley, there are many mastabas sepulchre annexes to the complex. The Europeans and the Egyptians who continue to dig in the earth of Saqqara find many tombs that had yet to be uncovered. The mastaba of Irukapta, or the Tomb of the Butchers, is at the foot of the path and dates from the 5th dynasty. Irukapta was the head of the roads to the slaughterhouses, or the king's butcher. His sepulchre is known for its line of statues in the first hall before the funeral chambers. The 8 statues represent the family of the deceased. Despite their rather average artistic quality, the colors are still well preserved. At the time of the pharaohs, the Egyptians wanted to believe in the immortality of humans. To imagine the afterlife, the people needed images of the dead's daily life on earth. The pathway of Unas, 700 meters long and 6.7 meters wide, formed a tunnel lit by the ingenious idea of not having the platform slabs touch. There is a slit of 20 centimeters running the length of it. It was protected by 2 side walls 3 meters high that supported a ceiling painted blue and decorated with yellow stars to resemble the sky. Entrances like this one appear along the causeway. The privilege to be able to be buried next to one's master was the best way of showing one's success in Egyptian society of the day. The king is at the center of everything, and from his imposing monument, he dominates over the vast necropolis conceived in the image of the court. The better a sepulchre is seen from the royal pyramid, the higher the rank. And the courtesans wanted to continue their service to their sovereign in their afterlives. The mastaba of the king's manicurists, Nyanknum and Khnumhotep, is a very unique tomb, dedicated to two people. But what is their connection? On each side of the door are the names of the owners of the tomb. To the left is the royal manicurist Khnumhotep, and to the right Nyanknum. The two men were also priests, leading the cult of Ra at the Sun Temple of the pharaoh. The decor is opulent. On each side of the entrance, we see men making and transporting statues to the effigy of the deceased. Cattle are also being brought, and fishermen are pulling fish into their nets. Khnumhotep and Nyanknum are holding hands. Their attitude shows the closeness of their relationship. It is widely believed that they were brothers. The wives of the two men are shown close to them. Here we see a water joust where men hit each other with their hands or sticks to make the other fall in the water. There, two men help a cow deliver her calf. One of the two brothers is carried by his servants. We can see a dwarf under the chair being carried. A full life is shown here on these walls, like an amazing documentary. The site of Saqqara is situated at the edge of the desert at the border of the land of the dead. The tombs multiplied over the pharaonic millennia, according to the privileged places of the successive royal residencies. As such, the royal tombs and the most modest sepulchres come together to offer many accounts of daily life in ancient Egypt. Over time, the simple mud brick chapel of the first mastabas grew into complex apartments. The decoration became remarkably elegant thanks to the use of quality limestone. Almost all the superstructures thus filled with many rooms, courtyards, and a hypostyle hall. The false door pillar has become a monumental element and usually hosts a statue of the deceased. Inside, there's an altar for the offerings. In the Middle Empire, when the pharaoh was distanced from his court, first at Thebes and then at Fayum, the necropolis was somewhat neglected. Under the new empire, with the renovation of the city of Memphis during the 18th and 19th Egyptian dynasties, the nobles and the courtesans were once again buried at Saqqara, in the tombs with funeral chapel temples overhead. The Hebsed courtyard is lined by a succession of chapels, some of sober design and others with motifs sculpted into the stone, imitating vegetation and woodwork. Each has a niche for offerings. 3 of the chapels have no decorative elements, but rather a flat roof. They seem to share certain architectural aspects. These are the chapels associated with the main Egyptian divinities of Upper and Lower Egypt. When we leave the Pyramids of Giza, the Sphinx and the site of Saqqara, we can, or perhaps we cannot, imagine the significance of 3,000 years of Egyptian civilization. 3,000 years of innovation, of creation, of knowledge and refinement. But also 3,000 years during which the construction of the cult of the dead was the centerpiece of the human adventure. Let's jump in time and go to Edfu on the left bank of the Nile, 755 kilometers south of Cairo, between Aswan and Luxor. The god of this city was a falcon god, and its temple is devoted to the cult of Horus, Horus of Beirut. This is the greatest and biggest temple of the Ptolemaic dynasties, in other words, from the Greek period, around 300 BC. 137 meters long, 79 meters wide, and with pylons of 36 meters, it is one of the best preserved temples in Egypt. Dedicated to the triad composed of the father Horus, his wife Hathor, and their son Harsamotus, this temple is of great interest because of the inscriptions that it offers. It details the daily events of the cult of Horus with the ceremonies of the 4 great yearly celebrations. Walls and columns tell of the different rites performed. Before the masted entrance are 2 gray granite statues of the falcon god. The cult of Horus, that which is above, is one of the oldest of Egypt. It dates back to prehistoric times. Horus is a god of many facets. He is the celestial falcon whose right eye is the sun and whose left eye is the moon. He is also Horus of the horizon, in a constant race with Ra, the son of the morning and the son of the night. And in the Osirian myth, Horus is the son of Osiris and Isis. Osiris, assassinated by his brother Set, is brought back to life to unite once again with Isis. From this miraculous union was born Horus, son of Isis. Beyond the grand pylon, on the internal side from which we can see the baptism of the king by Horus and Thoth, the great paved courtyard is surrounded on 3 sides by a gallery of columns, the last of which are topped with capitals, composites, florals, and open tops, with their trunks entirely decorated with stories of the king before the gods. All the columns are different. The decorations of the courtyard are based on the celebrations of Hathor and Horus, but also of the divinities linked to Horus in one way or another. Scenes of offerings, parades, and liturgical activities are, as was the custom, displayed on the walls. We see the feluccas as they go up the Nile or not, with or without their sails. The The columns are covered with inscriptions and reliefs where the king makes sacrifices to the gods. Here, the wall is decorated with bas-reliefs evoking the sacred ceremonies of the pharaoh. At the back stands a superb statue of Horus the falcon, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Carved from a block of gray granite, this statue guards the entrance to the sanctuary. The facade of pronaos is formed by 6 columns with palmed and floral capitals, between which are low walls separating the interior court of the temple, yet still letting in the light. Before entering this part of the temple, the king had to be purified. The reliefs of the facade represent this ritual done by Horus and Thoth. The ceiling of the vestibule is supported by 12 columns with varying capitals decorated with flowers and palms. Above the door is a winged disc framed by Uraeus representing Horus. On the side walls of the vestibule, we can read that the first stone of this temple was placed the 7th Epiphi of year 10 of the reign of Ptolemy III, making it August the 23rd, 237 BC. Going towards the temple, the floor rises, the ceilings lower, and the light diminishes, making the sanctuary an obscure and mysterious place. At the back of the vestibule is the entrance to the hypostyle hall, supported by 12 columns. Here we see the 12 nocturnal hours of the day. On the walls of this room, as on the sides of the first hypostyle hall serving as the vestibule, many of Egypt's divinities are honored. On the north wall, we see a procession of divine barks of Hathor and Horus. To the left, the treasure holding all of the precious objects and money of the temple. On the walls are the elements of the divine jewels that must also be stored inside. To the right of this room is the Nile chamber, where the water for purification rites was kept. In the laboratory were placed salves and perfumes for which the recipes are written on the walls. Also shown are the divinities of regions producing the products used for making the temple's magic potions. Horus, seen from afar, is at the head of the pharaoh's processional bark. Leaving the hypostyle hall, we go to the offering room. As its name states, it is here that the divine offerings were placed on the altars and sideboards. It leads to a staircase with rooms cut into the thickness of the wall. And a staircase leads you to the roof. One of the chapels surrounds the sanctuary that houses a replica of the sacred bark. The room gives off a strong mystical force. A patinaed granite cella, 4 meters high, is still in the center of the sanctuary. Here, the effigy of Horus, decorated and anointed with balms, receives offerings 3 times a day, accompanied by music and prayers. On the walls of this room are engraved the different steps of the awakening of the divinity and the actions of the king or his representative. In the morning, after having gone up the stairs to the cella, the great priest broke the seals that had been placed the night before, opening the 2 doors to awaken the divine statue and allow it to begin its daily tasks of creation. At night, he closed the cedar doors, sealed them anew, and retired by walking backwards, after having erased all traces of his footsteps with the help of a broom. This temple respects the ancestral traditions of construction. It was begun by the sanctuary around the cella, this monolithic block 4 meters high that is still in place today. The 3 chapels reaching out from around the sanctuary were destined for certain rites, such as the festival of the Great Reunion. During this celebration, one of the chapels welcomed the statue of the goddess Hathor, who came to visit her husband Horus. Each year, for 2 weeks, this popular celebration brought many joyous events. Between the temple and the surrounding wall, a corridor isolates the temple from the outside world. This one is adorned with scenes from the myth of Horus, in which the god had to prove, through many trials, that he was deserving of the Egyptian throne. Many great celebrations are represented: the commemoration of Horus's victory over Set and the fertility ceremonies of the Nile, which are linked to the annual visit of Hathor from Dendera, when she comes to reunite with her husband. In the Christian era, the temple was transformed into a church, explaining the destruction of part of the reliefs. The west wall tells the story of Horus's combat against Set, a hippopotamus and the murderer of his father Osiris. To avenge the death of his father Osiris, Horus confronts Set and wins the battle, thus inheriting the Egyptian throne. He becomes the first of the pharaohs after Osiris. The contrary of Set, who represents violence and chaos, Horus represents order, and like all pharaohs, he is the guarantor of universal harmony. The complex Egyptian theology must not be reduced to a single concept of good and evil, for good and evil are 2 complementary aspects of creation, both being present in all divinity. It is this belief that the Nile, that mark of fertility, bathes and transmits.